There are moments in life that feel ordinary. Moments that look exactly like every other day. The same room. The same walls. The same routine. The same people. Nothing appears different. Yet hidden beneath the surface, everything is changing. And today, I need you to listen carefully because this message is about something most people never recognize until it is too late. Not because disaster is chasing them. Not because fate is against them. But because they ignore the warnings that were placed in front of them long before the consequences arrived. So if you are here right now, do not rush away. Stay with this message until the end. Because what you are about to hear may reveal something you have been overlooking for a very long time. There is a reason you clicked. There is a reason these words found you. And there is a reason your attention was pulled here at this exact moment. For years, people have asked the same question. Why didn't I see it coming? Why didn't I notice the betrayal? Why didn't I recognize the danger? Why didn't I understand the lesson sooner? Why did I keep walking toward something that was slowly destroying my peace? The answer is almost always the same. The signs were there. But they were ignored. The warnings were present. But they were dismissed. The truth was visible. But it was uncomfortable. And today, we are going to talk about those warnings. Because sometimes God's protection does not arrive as a miracle. Sometimes it arrives as a feeling. A hesitation. A conviction. A closed door. A delayed opportunity. A relationship that suddenly changes. A plan that unexpectedly falls apart. At first, these things feel frustrating. But later, they often become the very reasons a person was protected. Think about your own life. How many times have you looked back and realized that something you desperately wanted would have hurt you if it had happened? How many times have you cried over a closed door only to discover later that it was saving you from greater pain? How many times did you call something a disappointment only to discover it was actually protection? Most people never think about that. They focus only on what they lost. They never notice what they escaped. And that brings us to something important. There are people listening right now who feel restless. You cannot explain it. You cannot fully understand it. But something feels different. Your spirit has been unsettled. Your heart has been alert. You feel as though something is trying to get your attention. And perhaps that feeling is not here by accident. Because one of the greatest mistakes a person can make is assuming that every warning comes with flashing lights. Life rarely works that way. Sometimes the warning is subtle. A conversation that keeps replaying in your mind. A decision that never feels right. A path that becomes harder every time you try to force it. A relationship that drains your energy instead of strengthening it. A habit that slowly steals your joy. A voice deep inside telling you that something must change. And yet many people keep moving forward anyway. Not because they are foolish. But because change is uncomfortable. The familiar feels safe. Even when it is hurting us. Even when it is limiting us. Even when it is leading us toward unnecessary pain. The human mind often chooses familiar discomfort over unfamiliar freedom. And that is why so many people remain stuck. But today, imagine for a moment that you are standing at a crossroads. One path looks easy, comfortable, predictable. The other path requires courage, faith, growth, trust. Most people choose the first path. Not because it is better. Because it is easier. Yet history is filled with stories of people whose lives changed forever because they had the courage to listen when others ignored the warning. They paid attention. They paused. They reflected. They changed direction. And because they changed direction, everything changed. Now listen carefully. This next part is important. There are three kinds of tragedy that quietly enter people's lives. The first is obvious. The second is hidden. The third is the most dangerous of all. The obvious tragedy is external. A bad decision. A toxic environment. A harmful influence. Most people can recognize these eventually. The hidden tragedy is internal. Bitterness. Fear. Resentment. Pride. Negative thinking. These things often grow unnoticed. But the third tragedy is the most dangerous. It is spiritual blindness. It is the inability to recognize what is happening while it is happening. And that is what keeps people trapped. Because if you cannot see the problem, you cannot solve it. If you cannot recognize the danger, you cannot avoid it. If you cannot hear the warning, you cannot respond. That is why awareness is powerful. Awareness changes everything. The moment a person becomes aware, transformation becomes possible. The moment a person sees clearly, a new future becomes available. The moment a person understands what must change, growth begins. And perhaps that is why this message found you. Not to create fear. Not to create panic. But to create awareness. Because awareness is often the first step toward protection. Think about a lighthouse. Its purpose is not to control the ocean. Its purpose is to reveal danger before disaster occurs. The lighthouse does not force ships to change direction. It simply provides visibility. The choice belongs to the captain. In the same way, wisdom reveals what emotion tries to hide. Truth reveals what denial tries to protect. And clarity reveals what confusion tries to conceal. Right now, ask yourself honestly. What area of your life have you been avoiding? What truth have you been postponing? What decision have you delayed? What warning have you ignored? Do not answer quickly. Think carefully. Because sometimes the answer that first comes to mind is the one you need to hear most. There are people listening who know they need to let go of something. Others know they need to forgive someone. Others know they need to stop doubting themselves. Others know they need to leave a destructive cycle. Others know they need to stop settling for less than they deserve. And yet they continue waiting. Waiting for the perfect time. Waiting for certainty. Waiting for someone else to act first. Waiting for circumstances to change. But life rarely rewards endless waiting. Growth begins when action begins. Change begins when courage appears. Freedom begins when a decision is made. And this brings us to the revelation that many people spend years discovering. The greatest danger is not failure. The greatest danger is remaining unchanged. Because failure teaches. Failure develops. Failure strengthens. But stagnation slowly drains possibility. It steals potential. It steals purpose. It steals years that can never be recovered. Imagine looking back 10 years from now. Imagine seeing two versions of yourself. One listened to wisdom. The other ignored it. One embraced growth. The other avoided it. One acted. The other delayed. Which future do you want to become? Because every future begins with today's decisions. Every outcome begins with today's habits. Every transformation begins with today's choice. And that choice is closer than you think. You do not need to have every answer. You do not need to see the entire path. You only need enough courage to take the next step. That is how great journeys begin. One step. One decision. One act of faith. One moment of courage. And then another. And another. And another. Until one day you realize you are no longer the person you used to be. You are stronger. Wiser. More resilient. More aware. More prepared. And more aligned with the purpose that has been waiting for you all along. So if this message feels personal, pay attention. If these words feel familiar, pay attention. If something deep inside you is stirring, pay attention. Because sometimes the most important warning is not about what is coming toward you. Sometimes it is about what you must leave behind. The fear. The doubt. The bitterness. The excuses. The limitations. The old version of yourself. Perhaps that is the real emergency. Not a catastrophe outside. But a transformation inside. Because the moment you release what is holding you back, a different future becomes possible. A future filled with greater peace. Greater wisdom. Greater strength. Greater purpose. And greater clarity. So remember this. Not every closed door is rejection. Not every delay is punishment. Not every obstacle is defeat. Sometimes protection looks exactly like interruption. Sometimes guidance looks exactly like redirection. And sometimes the greatest blessing arrives disguised as a setback. The people who understand this become unstoppable. Because they stop interpreting every challenge as a sign to quit. Instead, they begin asking a different question. What is this moment trying to teach me? And that question changes everything. Because lessons become wisdom. Wisdom becomes strength. Strength becomes confidence. And confidence becomes the foundation for an extraordinary future. So as this message comes to an end, carry this thought with you. Pay attention. Listen carefully. Stay aware. Trust wisdom. Choose growth. And never underestimate the power of a single decision made at the right moment. Because sometimes the difference between tragedy and triumph is simply the willingness to listen before it is too late. And today, you listened. Now listen carefully, because what you are about to hear may be the most important part of this entire message. Many people believe tragedy begins with a single event. A sudden loss. A shocking betrayal. A devastating mistake. But that is not how it usually happens. Most tragedies begin quietly. They begin as small compromises. Small warnings. Small decisions that seem harmless in the moment. A person ignores their intuition once. Then twice. Then 3 times. Soon, they no longer hear it. A person tolerates disrespect once. Then twice. Then again. Soon, they begin believing they deserve it. A person postpones their purpose one day. Then another. Then another. Soon, years have disappeared. That is why awareness is so powerful. Because what is small today may become enormous tomorrow. And what is ignored today may become impossible to ignore later. Think about a tiny crack in a wall. At first, it looks insignificant. Easy to dismiss. Easy to overlook. But if left alone long enough, that small crack can threaten the entire structure. Life works the same way. The little things matter. The conversations you tolerate. The habits you repeat. The thoughts you entertain. The influences you allow around you. Everything is shaping your future, whether you realize it or not. And right now, there are people listening who have been sensing that something needs to change. You have felt it. Late at night. During quiet moments. When the distractions disappear. When the noise fades away. Something deep inside keeps whispering that your current situation is not where your story is supposed to end. You were meant for more. Not more possessions. Not more status. Not more attention. More purpose. More growth. More peace. More alignment. More truth. But reaching that future requires something most people avoid. Honesty. Complete honesty. Not with the world. With yourself. Because transformation begins the moment a person becomes honest about where they are. Many people spend years pretending everything is fine. Pretending they are happy. Pretending they are fulfilled. Pretending they are moving forward. Yet inside, they know something is missing. Inside, they know they have drifted away from the life they were meant to build. And the longer they ignore that feeling, the louder it becomes. Until eventually it can no longer be ignored. Maybe that is where you are today. Maybe you have been carrying questions nobody else knows about. Questions about your future. Questions about your purpose. Questions about whether you are truly living the life you were meant to live. If so, understand this. Questions are not weakness. Questions are often the beginning of wisdom. Because people who never question anything rarely grow. They stay comfortable. They stay predictable. They stay exactly where they are. But people who are willing to ask difficult questions unlock extraordinary possibilities. They challenge old beliefs. They challenge old fears. They challenge old limitations. And as a result, their entire lives begin to change. Now here is something that may surprise you. The greatest obstacle standing in front of most people is not lack of opportunity. It is lack of belief. Not belief in circumstances. Belief in themselves. Many people have spent years convincing themselves that they are not capable enough. Not talented enough. Not strong enough. Not smart enough. not worthy enough. And because they believe these lies, they never fully step into their potential. Imagine a powerful eagle raised among chickens. It grows up believing it belongs on the ground. It sees others scratching in the dirt and assumes that is all life has to offer. It never spreads its wings. It never discovers the sky. Not because it cannot fly. Because it never believed it could. How many people are living exactly like that? How many people have accepted limitations that were never meant to define them? How many people have mistaken temporary struggles for permanent identities? A setback is not your identity. A failure is not your identity. A disappointment is not your identity. A difficult season is not your identity. These are experiences, not definitions. And the moment you understand that, something powerful begins to happen. You stop seeing yourself through the lens of your past. You begin seeing yourself through the lens of possibility. That shift changes everything. Because people rarely rise higher than their beliefs. Your beliefs shape your actions. Your actions shape your habits. Your habits shape your future. Which means every transformation begins with changing what you believe. Now imagine this. Imagine waking up tomorrow with absolute certainty that your future can be better than your past. Imagine carrying that belief into every conversation, every opportunity, every challenge, every decision. How differently would you live? How differently would you think? How differently would you act? Most people underestimate the power of belief. Yet belief is what allows people to keep moving when circumstances suggest they should quit. Belief is what keeps people standing when life tries to knock them down. Belief is what turns ordinary individuals into extraordinary examples of perseverance. And perhaps that is one of the messages you needed to hear today. Do not allow temporary conditions to convince you that your future has already been decided. Your story is still being written. Your journey is still unfolding. Your opportunities are still ahead of you. But there is another warning that must be discussed. A warning many people never recognize until years later. The danger of surrounding yourself with negativity. Energy is contagious. Mindsets are contagious. Attitudes are contagious. Spend enough time around hopeless people, and hope begins to feel unrealistic. Spend enough time around fearful people, and courage begins to feel dangerous. Spend enough time around negativity, and positivity begins to feel impossible. This is why your environment matters. Not because it controls you, but because it influences you. The voices around you shape the voice within you. And eventually, that inner voice becomes the foundation of your decisions. Ask yourself honestly. Who are you listening to? What are you consuming every day? What conversations dominate your life? Are they lifting you higher? Or pulling you lower? Because every influence is moving you somewhere. Nothing is neutral. Everything is either feeding growth or feeding stagnation. This realization changed countless lives. The moment people became intentional about what they allowed into their minds, everything began shifting. Their confidence improved. Their outlook improved. Their decisions improved. Their future improved. Why? Because they stopped feeding fear and started feeding faith. They stopped feeding doubt and started feeding possibility. And once that happened, they became capable of seeing opportunities they had previously overlooked. Now think about this carefully. What if some of the doors that appear closed right now are not actually locked? What if fear has simply convinced you not to try the handle? How many dreams remain unrealized because people assume failure before taking action? How many opportunities are missed because people reject themselves before life ever has a chance to? How many futures are abandoned because someone listened to fear more than possibility? The truth is that fear often lies. Fear exaggerates danger. Fear magnifies uncertainty. Fear creates imaginary obstacles. And while caution can be wise, fear can become a prison if left unchecked. The people who achieve extraordinary things are not fearless. They simply refuse to let fear make their decisions. They move forward despite uncertainty. They act despite doubt. They continue despite obstacles. And eventually, those small acts of courage create remarkable outcomes. So if there is something you have been postponing, a goal, a conversation, a decision, a step forward, perhaps this is your reminder. Not that success is guaranteed, but that growth is impossible without movement. And movement always begins with a choice. A choice to stop waiting. A choice to stop hiding. A choice to stop doubting. A choice to start becoming the person you were capable of being all along. Because the greatest tragedy is not failing. The greatest tragedy is reaching the end of your journey and realizing you never truly lived up to your potential. You never explored your gifts. You never followed your purpose. You never trusted your ability to grow. Do not let that become your story. The future is still unwritten. The next chapter is still waiting. And what happens next may depend entirely on the decisions you make after hearing this message. So pay attention to the signs. Pay attention to the lessons. Pay attention to the opportunities hidden inside today's challenges. Because sometimes the greatest rescue arrives as a realization. A realization that changes everything. And that realization may be closer than you think. The most extraordinary chapter of your life may not be behind you. It may be directly ahead. And the decision to step into it begins now. Before you leave, there is one final truth that must be understood. A truth so many people discover only after years of struggle. A truth that can completely change the direction of a person's life. The truth is this. Not every battle is meant to be fought. Read that again in your heart. Not every battle is meant to be fought. Some battles are distractions. Some battles are traps. Some battles consume your energy while giving nothing in return. Yet countless people spend years fighting wars that were never theirs to begin with. They fight to prove themselves to people who have already made up their minds. They fight for acceptance from people who refuse to appreciate them. They fight against circumstances they cannot control. They fight yesterday's mistakes. They fight old regrets. They fight old pain. And while they are busy fighting the wrong battles, they miss the opportunities standing directly in front of them. Think about how much energy people waste trying to change things that are already finished. Trying to rewrite the past. Trying to force outcomes. trying to control every detail of life. But life does not work that way. The past cannot be changed. Only the future can. And every moment spent trapped in regret is a moment stolen from tomorrow. This is why wisdom matters. Wisdom teaches the difference between what deserves your attention and what deserves your release. Because freedom begins the moment you stop carrying things that were never yours to carry. There are people listening right now who are carrying burdens that have become far too heavy. The burden of guilt. The burden of resentment. The burden of disappointment. The burden of constantly comparing themselves to others. And these burdens have become so familiar that they no longer realize how much strength they are draining every single day. But imagine for a moment what would happen if you finally let them go. Imagine waking up without carrying yesterday's failures. Imagine moving forward without dragging old wounds into every new opportunity. Imagine building your future without constantly looking over your shoulder. How different would your life become? The answer is simple. Everything would change. Because the weight you release creates room for the future you desire. And perhaps that is one of the greatest messages hidden inside this entire conversation. You cannot step fully into a new chapter while clinging tightly to the old one. The two cannot coexist forever. At some point, a choice must be made. A choice to keep looking backward. Or a choice to move forward. A choice to remain stuck. Or a choice to grow. A choice to live in fear. Or a choice to live with faith. And every extraordinary life is built upon those choices. Not one choice. Thousands of them. Small decisions repeated consistently over time. That is how transformation happens. Not overnight. Not instantly. But steadily. Day by day. Choice by choice. Step by step. Most people underestimate the power of small decisions. They believe change must be dramatic. They believe transformation must be sudden. But the truth is often the opposite. A small positive decision repeated every day becomes a powerful force. One better habit. One better thought. One better action. Repeated consistently. That is how futures are changed. That is how destinies are shaped. That is how ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things. Now imagine two individuals standing in the same place today. They have the same challenges. The same obstacles. The same uncertainties. One person chooses growth. The other chooses comfort. One person chooses courage. The other chooses excuses. One person takes action. The other waits endlessly for perfect conditions. 5 years later, their lives look completely different. Not because one was luckier. Because one made different decisions. And that is the part many people fail to understand. Your future is not determined by what happens to you. It is heavily influenced by how you respond to what happens to you. Two people can experience the same setback. One becomes bitter. The other becomes stronger. Two people can face the same disappointment. One quits. The other learns. Two people can encounter the same obstacle. One sees a wall. The other sees a lesson. Perspective changes everything. And perhaps that is why this message found you today. Not to predict disaster. Not to create fear. Not to convince you that something terrible is around the corner. But to awaken something inside you. To remind you that awareness matters. Wisdom matters. Growth matters. And your decisions matter. Because the real emergency is not always outside of you. Sometimes the real emergency is allowing fear, doubt, negativity, and hesitation to silently steal years from your life. Sometimes the real tragedy is watching your potential remain unused. Watching your dreams remain unexplored. Watching your gifts remain hidden. That is the tragedy you must escape. The tragedy of becoming less than you were capable of becoming. The tragedy of settling when you were meant to grow. The tragedy of shrinking when you were meant to expand. The tragedy of surviving when you were capable of thriving. And here is the remarkable news. You still have time. You are still here. Your story is still unfolding. Your opportunities are still alive. Your future is still waiting. No matter what happened yesterday. No matter how many mistakes were made. No matter how many setbacks occurred. Today is still a new day. A new opportunity. A new beginning. And every great transformation begins with a single realization. The realization that your future does not have to resemble your past. The realization that growth is possible. The realization that change is available. The realization that you are stronger than you think. Wiser than you realize. And more capable than you have been led to believe. So as these final moments arrive, remember this message. When fear tells you to stop, keep moving. When doubt tells you to quit, keep growing. When negativity tells you nothing will change, keep believing. When obstacles appear, keep learning. When opportunities arrive, be ready. Because the next chapter of your life may depend on the decisions you make starting today. Do not ignore the lessons. Do not ignore the opportunities. Do not ignore the quiet wisdom that keeps urging you forward. Pay attention. Stay aware. Stay hopeful. Stay focused. And most importantly, keep moving toward the person you were always capable of becoming. Because the greatest rescue is not escaping a tragedy. The greatest rescue is escaping the limitations that have been holding you back for years. And the moment you do that, everything begins to change. Your perspective changes. Your confidence changes. Your actions change. Your future changes. And one day, you will look back at this moment and realize something incredible. The emergency was never meant to frighten you. It was meant to wake you up. And once you awakened, your entire life began moving in a new direction. A stronger direction. A wiser direction. A more purposeful direction. The direction you were always meant to follow. And that journey begins now.